In the suffocating chambers of El Escorial Monastery, a once mighty king lay dying, his body a map of suffering, his legacy slowly dissolving like shadows at sunset. Philip II of Spain, who had once commanded an empire where the sun never set, was now reduced to a fragile shell, consumed by pain and the relentless march of mortality. The year was 1598. Outside the stone walls, the vast Spanish Empire stretched across continents, from the Americas to the Philippines, a testament to Philip's extraordinary reign. But inside these rooms, something far more intimate and brutal was unfolding: the gradual deconstruction of a human being. His body had become a battlefield long before his final days. Decades of chronic illness, gout, kidney stones, and mysterious fevers had carved deep lines into his once regal face. Each movement was an act of pure endurance, each breath a negotiation with pain that seemed to have taken permanent residence in his flesh. Philip's physicians watched with a mixture of professional detachment and genuine concern. They understood they were witnessing the decline of not just a man, but an era. Treatments of the time, bloodletting, herbal concoctions, and primitive surgical interventions offered more torment than relief. His skin, once smooth and commanding, was now a landscape of inflammation and vulnerability. Religious devotion had always been Philip's armor against the world's uncertainties. Now, it became his final refuge. Surrounded by priests and religious artifacts, he sought solace in prayer and contemplation, transforming his chamber of suffering into a site of spiritual meditation. The same methodical mind that had orchestrated global politics now turned inward, confronting the ultimate political negotiation, his own mortality. Contemporaries would later describe these final months as a profound transformation. The king who had been feared across Europe, who had launched the Spanish Armada, fought Protestant rebellions, and shaped global politics, was now stripped down to raw human vulnerability. His power, once absolute, now meant nothing against the universal equalizer of human suffering. Physically, Philip was deteriorating rapidly. Kidney stones, a torment he had endured for years, now seemed to signal a more complete breakdown. Each stone was like a small rebellion within his body, a painful reminder of the limits of human control. Fever would rise and fall like tides, leaving him alternately lucid and delirious. But even in weakness, his mind remained sharp. He continued to sign documents, offer political counsel, and maintain the intricate machinery of his vast empire. This was a man who understood that power was not just about physical strength, but about maintaining control even when the body failed. As summer turned to autumn, Philip's condition became increasingly grave. The monastery became a liminal space, part hospital, part royal court, part spiritual sanctuary. Servants moved quietly, doctors consulted in hushed tones, and priests prepared for what seemed inevitable. In these moments, Philip II was more than a historical figure. He was a human being confronting the most profound of human experiences: the slow, inexorable approach of death. His story was not just about an empire's decline, but about the universal journey of a powerful man facing his own mortality. Stripped of titles, confronting the raw, unfiltered reality of human existence. The end was approaching, and with it, the final chapter of one of history's most complex and powerful monarchs was about to be written. In the tapestry of Spanish history, few threads are as richly woven as those of Philip II. A monarch whose ambition stretched across continents, whose power seemed almost divine in its reach. Born in 1527 to Emperor Charles V, Philip inherited not just a kingdom, but an empire that spanned from the Americas to the Philippines, a global dominion unlike anything the world had ever seen. At just 16, Philip began his apprenticeship in governance, learning the intricate dance of diplomacy and power from his father. When Charles abdicated in 1556, transferring the Spanish crown and Habsburg territories, Philip stepped into a role that would define an era. He was not merely a king, but the guardian of a vast, interconnected world. Catholic, imperial, and unyieldingly ambitious. His early reign was a masterpiece of strategic brilliance. While other European monarchs struggled with religious fractures, Philip moved with calculated precision. The Peace of Cateau Cambresis in 1559 solidified Spanish dominance, giving him control over significant territories in Italy and establishing Spain as Europe's preeminent power. Each diplomatic negotiation, each military campaign, was like a carefully placed chess piece, deliberate, strategic, transformative. Religious conviction burned at the core of Philip's vision. He saw himself as Catholicism's ultimate defender, a mission that would shape every decision of his reign. The Inquisition became his instrument, a tool to maintain theological uniformity and suppress potential dissent. In the Netherlands, in England, in the New World, everywhere Philip's influence touched, the Catholic faith was to be preserved, protected, enforced. His architectural vision mirrored his political ambitions. The Escorial, his magnificent palace monastery complex near Madrid, was more than a building, it was a statement. Symmetrical, austere, embodying the discipline and religious devotion that defined his rule, the structure rose from the landscape like a testament to Spain's power and Philip's personal philosophy. Maritime expansion became another cornerstone of his reign. Spanish galleons traversed global trade routes, bringing unprecedented wealth from the Americas. Silver from Mexican and Peruvian mines flooded European markets, transforming economic landscapes and funding Philip's grand designs. Yet, this was not mere economic opportunism, it was a carefully orchestrated system of global governance. But power always demands sacrifice. Philip was a meticulous administrator, often working 16-hour days, poring over reports from distant colonies, making decisions that would ripple across continents. His personal life was secondary to his role as monarch. Marriages were political arrangements, children were potential diplomatic tools, and personal comfort was irrelevant compared to the demands of rulership. By the 1570s, Philip had become more than a king. He was a symbol of Catholic resistance against Protestant Reformation, of imperial ambition, of a world order governed by divine right and hierarchical precision. The failed invasion of England in 1588 with the Spanish Armada would puncture this image, but not completely shatter it. In these early decades, Philip II was not just ruling an empire, he was architecting a vision of global order, a complex machinery of governance that seemed to pulse with an almost supernatural coherence. His power was not just political, but deeply philosophical, a worldview that saw monarchy as a sacred trust, a divine responsibility to shape human civilization. Little did he know that this magnificent edifice of power would, in time, begin to crumble, revealing the deeply human struggles behind the imperial facade. The stone walls of the Escorial whispered secrets of decay. In the summer of 1590, King Philip II of Spain, once the most powerful monarch in the world, was transforming into a shadow of his former self. His body, like his vast empire, was slowly crumbling from within. Physicians moved quietly through his chambers, their faces etched with a concern they dared not fully express. Philip's body had become a battlefield of pain. His skin mottled with swelling, his joints twisting with an agony that even royal privilege could not subdue. Gout, that merciless aristocratic disease, was consuming him joint by joint, moment by moment. But the physical decay was merely a reflection of something deeper. The mighty Habsburg Empire that Philip had meticulously constructed was fracturing. The Netherlands burned with rebellion, England remained defiant, and the dreams of Catholic restoration were slipping through his trembling fingers like fine sand. In these moments of vulnerability, Philip was not the imposing monarch who had once commanded global territories. He was a man confronting the brutal mathematics of mortality, watching his life's work dissolve before his eyes. Each messenger that arrived brought another fragment of bad news. Military defeats, diplomatic failures, the slow disintegration of Spanish influence. His religious devotion, once a source of strength, now seemed like a desperate anchor. Hours were spent in prayer, surrounded by religious artifacts, as if divine intervention might reverse the tide of decline. The man who had been the sword and shield of Catholicism was now seeking solace in its most intimate rituals. The manuscripts and maps that once represented his global ambitions now seemed like relics of a fading dream. Vast territories that had been conquered, colonized, and controlled were becoming uncertain possessions. The confidence that had defined his earlier reign had been replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. Historians would later speak of this period as Philip's transformation from the palace corridors whispered secrets of decay. Each footstep echoed against stone walls that once resonated with triumph, now muffled by the weight of Philip's deteriorating body. His chambers, once a testament to Spanish imperial might, had become a sanctuary of suffering, a private theater where disease performed its merciless choreography. By 1598, Philip II was no longer the monarch who had commanded vast global empires. His body, once a symbol of rigid Catholic discipline, was now a fragile vessel wrestling with multiple ailments. Gout twisted his joints, rendering his once powerful hands almost useless. An unrelenting fever burned through him, transforming his skin into a landscape of pallor and inflammation. Physicians moved in careful rhythms around his bed, their faces etched with a mixture of professional concern and barely concealed dread. They understood that treating a king was more performance than medicine. Each prescription, each recommendation carried the weight of potential political consequence. Royal illness was never just a medical event. It was a delicate negotiation between human frailty and imperial expectations. The rooms maintained a controlled stillness, disrupted only by Philip's labored breathing and occasional whispered prayers. Religious artifacts surrounded his bed, crucifixes, devotional paintings, prayer books, silent witnesses to a monarch whose faith had been the fundamental architecture of his reign. Even in physical collapse, Philip remained committed to the theological battles that had defined his life. Servants moved with choreographed silence, understanding that every gesture might be observed, every whisper potentially recorded. They changed linens stained with sweat, prepared medicinal broths, and maintained the illusion of dignity around a body that was systematically betraying its own power. His physical decline mirrored the gradual fracturing of the Spanish Empire. The same methodical mind that had once coordinated global military campaigns now struggled to track the progression of his own deterioration. Fever dreams mixed memories of past victories with the growing awareness of imperial limitations, the Dutch resistance, the English challenges, the increasing fragility of Spanish dominance. Doctors prescribed increasingly desperate treatments, herbal concoctions, bloodletting, temperature management. Each intervention represented humanity's perpetual struggle against mortality, especially poignant when that human happened to be a king who had spent a lifetime believing he was God's chosen instrument. Pain transformed Philip's perception. The man who had meticulously controlled vast territories now found himself controlled by his own body's rebellion. His legendary administrative precision gave way to moments of vulnerability, of raw human experience stripped of royal pretense. As autumn light filtered through heavy palace curtains, Philip II inhabited a liminal space between political legend and human vulnerability. His body told a story more complex than any royal chronicle, a narrative of ambition, belief, and the ultimate democratic truth that no power, no matter how absolute, can permanently resist human fragility. The king who had shaped European religious and political landscapes for decades was now being reshaped by something far more fundamental: the inevitable march of human mortality. In the shadowed corridors of the Escorial Palace, King Philip II's body was slowly betraying him, a quiet rebellion more devastating than any military campaign. By 1598, his once powerful frame had become a fragile vessel of unrelenting pain, each breath a testament to human vulnerability. The decline was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. Gout twisted his joints with merciless precision, transforming royal hands that once signed imperial decrees into gnarled, useless appendages. His physicians watched helplessly as inflammation crept through his body like a silent invader, each movement bringing excruciating agony. But physical pain was merely the surface of Philip's torment. Deeper wounds festered. The loss of his empire's momentum, the gradual unraveling of Spanish global dominance. Every reports of military setbacks arrived like additional weights upon his already burdened shoulders. The man who had once commanded the most powerful empire in the world was now confined to his chambers, his influence shrinking with each passing month. His medical records reveal a complex landscape of suffering. Chronic ulcers, possibly stemming from years of stress and poor diet, had become constant companions. Surgeons would carefully dress wounds that refused to heal, their treatments a mixture of medieval understanding and desperate innovation. Herbal poultices, mercury-based salves, and bloodletting, each intervention a roll of the medical dice in an era where understanding of human anatomy was still rudimentary. Psychologically, Philip was simultaneously experiencing profound isolation. The vast network of spies and informants he had cultivated throughout his reign now felt distant, their reports offering little comfort. His numerous marriages, each ending in loss, had left him fundamentally alone. Personal grief intertwined with physical decline, creating a private landscape of unspoken suffering. Religious devotion became his primary solace. Hours were spent in prayer, rosary beads slipping through fingers swollen with inflammation. The same meticulous attention he once applied to imperial administration now turned inward. A microscopic examination of his own mortality, his spiritual preparation for what he believed was an inevitable reckoning. His physicians, some of the most renowned in Europe, documented his decline with a mixture of clinical detachment and genuine concern. They understood they were witnessing the gradual disintegration of not just a man, but an era. Each examination revealed new complexities, respiratory challenges, potential early signs of kidney failure, chronic inflammation that modern medicine would recognize as autoimmune in nature. The most profound suffering, however, was perhaps psychological. Philip understood he was witnessing the beginning of Spanish imperial decline, a realization that must have been more painful than any physical ailment. The mighty machinery of empire that he had so carefully constructed was showing its first significant fractures. In these silent struggles, Philip II transformed from a global monarch to a profoundly human figure, vulnerable, suffering, yet still maintaining a dignity that transcended his physical limitations. His body was failing, but his spirit remained resolute, a final act of defiance against the inevitable. As winter approached in 1598, the king who had once controlled territories spanning continents was reduced to a mere mortal, waiting, watching, and ultimately surrendering to forces beyond his control. The chambers of El Escorial Palace had grown silent, punctuated only by the labored breathing of a dying king. Philip II, once the most powerful monarch in Europe, was now reduced to a shell of his former self, his body betraying him in ways no military campaign ever could. His physicians watched with a mix of professional detachment and genuine concern. The leg ulcers that had plagued him for years had transformed into something more sinister, a relentless infection consuming him from within. Each passing day witnessed another piece of his imperial dignity being stripped away, layer by layer. The year was 1598, and the Spanish Empire, which Philip had meticulously constructed and defended, now hung in a delicate balance. His body mirrored the fragility of his vast, overextended territories, wounded, inflamed, struggling to maintain cohesion. Pain had become Philip's constant companion. The ulcers leaked continuously, requiring frequent dressing changes that left him weak and humiliated. Physicians applied increasingly desperate treatments, mercury compounds, herbal poultices, prayers, each intervention a testament to medical limitations of the era. What struck those close to him was not just physical deterioration, but the psychological unraveling. A monarch who had spent decades controlling every minute detail of his empire now found himself utterly dependent on servants and medical attendants. The man who had dispatched the Spanish Armada, who had managed complex diplomatic negotiations across continents, could no longer control his own bodily functions. His son and heir, Philip III, watched silently. The young prince understood this was more than a medical crisis. It was a profound political transition. Each moment of his father's suffering represented the gradual transfer of an unprecedented global power. The king's religious devotion intensified with his suffering. Convinced his ailments were both physical and spiritual trials, he requested constant prayers, commissioned masses, and sought divine intervention. Monks and priests moved through the royal chambers, their whispered Latin prayers creating a somber backdrop to his decline. Historians would later note the cruel symmetry. A monarch who had been ruthlessly precise in managing distant territories was now experiencing a similarly methodical disintegration. His body, like his empire, was breaking down incrementally, each system failing with deliberate, almost mathematical progression. By October, Philip could barely move. The leg ulcers had transformed into gangrenous wounds, radiating an odor that permeated the palace. Attendants spoke in hushed tones, understanding they were witnessing not just a personal tragedy, but the end of an era. His final weeks were a study in dignified suffering. Despite excruciating pain, Philip maintained a remarkable composure. He continued to sign documents, offer counsel, and manage state affairs from his bed, a testament to the iron will that had defined his reign. On the 13th of September 1598, Philip II finally succumbed. But his death was not a singular moment. It was a process that had been unfolding for months, a gradual surrender that mirrored the complex political landscape he had so carefully constructed and would now leave behind. The most powerful monarch in the world died not in a blaze of glory, but in quiet pain. His body a map of imperial ambition, limitation, and ultimately, mortality. The chambers were silent, save for the labored breathing of a man once considered the most powerful monarch in the world. Philip II, King of Spain, lay dying, his body ravaged by disease, his empire slowly crumbling around him. In the dim light of his private quarters in El Escorial, the weight of an entire world seemed to press against his failing frame. Each breath was a struggle, each moment a testament to the relentless march of mortality that spares no one, not even kings. Gout had been his constant companion for years, but now something more insidious was consuming him. His legs were swollen and ulcerated, his skin a patchwork of painful lesions. The royal physicians moved about with a quiet desperation, applying poultices and herbal remedies that seemed increasingly futile against the tide of his deterioration. This was not the Philip who had once commanded the most powerful empire in the world. This was a broken man, witnessing the gradual disintegration of his life's work. The Spanish Habsburg dynasty, which he had so carefully cultivated, now seemed as fragile as his own failing body. His mind, however, remained sharp. Even as his physical strength waned, Philip's intellect continued to process the complex political landscape of Europe. Reports from his vast territories continued to arrive, each one a reminder of the immense responsibility that had defined his reign. The irony was not lost on those who watched him. Philip, who had spent decades controlling every aspect of his vast empire through meticulous bureaucracy and strategic manipulation, was now completely at the mercy of forces beyond his control. His body was rebelling, much like the territories he had struggled to keep unified. Religious fervor had always been Philip's guiding principle. Even in these final moments, his commitment to Catholicism remained unwavering. Priests moved in and out of his chamber, offering last rites and spiritual comfort. He would die as he had lived, a devout defender of the Catholic faith. By September 13, 1598, it was clear the end was near. His son and heir, Philip III, waited in the adjoining chambers, a living symbol of both continuation and inevitable change. The transition of power was imminent, the great machinery of the Spanish monarchy preparing for its next iteration. When death finally came, it was almost anticlimactic. No dramatic last words, no grand gestures, just the quiet cessation of breath from a man who had shaped the destiny of nations. Philip II died as he had lived, methodical, controlled, introspective. His legacy was complex. He had been a monarch who expanded the Spanish Empire to its greatest territorial extent, yet he had also overseen its gradual decline. The seeds of imperial decay were already planted during his reign. Economic strain, military overextension, and religious conflicts had begun to erode the foundations of Spanish global dominance. Historians would debate his impact for centuries. Was he a zealous defender of Catholicism or a ruthless imperial administrator? A visionary leader or a rigid authoritarian? The truth, as always, lived somewhere in the nuanced spaces between these characterizations. In the quiet of El Escorial, Philip II's body was prepared for the elaborate funeral rituals befitting a Habsburg monarch. But the real legacy was not in the pomp and ceremony. It was in the profound transformations he had set in motion, the echoes of which would reverberate through European history for generations to come. In the shadowed chambers of El Escorial, where stone walls absorbed the whispers of dying royal breath, Philip II's final days became a haunting testament to mortality's unforgiving embrace. His body, once a vessel of imperial power, now betrayed him, transforming from a monarch who controlled vast global territories to a fragile, suffering human. The decay was methodical, almost clinical. Gout ravaged his joints, transforming robust limbs into twisted, agonizing appendages. Fever consumed him in waves, alternating between burning intensity and chilling sweats. Each labored breath carried the weight of an empire's unfinished dreams, each moment a negotiation between continued existence and impending surrender. Philip knew intimately what power looked like and what it ultimately meant. He had watched kingdoms rise and fall, witnessed the intricate dance of diplomacy and destruction. Now, stripped of royal pageantry, he confronted the most fundamental human vulnerability: physical disintegration. His physicians moved with a choreographed precision around his bed, their treatments a mixture of medieval understanding and desperate hope. Herbal tinctures, bloodletting, prayers, all became part of a complex ritual attempting to hold back the inevitable. But death, that most democratic of experiences, recognized no royal privilege. What haunted Philip more than physical pain was the realization of legacy. The Spanish Empire, which he had meticulously constructed and defended, seemed suddenly fragile. His children, products of multiple marriages, some dead, some politically compromised, represented an uncertain future. The grand vision of Catholic supremacy that had driven his entire reign now seemed like a fading dream. Religious devotion became his final refuge. Surrounded by relics and religious iconography, Philip transformed his sickbed into a site of spiritual meditation. He saw his suffering not as punishment, but as a form of divine test, a final opportunity for spiritual refinement before meeting God. The irony was profound. A man who had controlled massive global territories, who had dispatched armadas and reshaped continental politics, was now completely dependent on servants and medical attendants. Power, in its most brutal revelation, was always temporary. Historians would later document his decline with clinical precision, but they could never fully capture the intimate human drama unfolding within those stone walls. The monarch who had been feared across Europe was now reduced to a vulnerable, pain-racked body, confronting the most fundamental human experience: mortality. As life slowly ebbed, Philip understood something fundamental about power: its ultimate insignificance in the face of human vulnerability. Kingdoms would rise and fall, but the individual human experience remained unchanged, fragile, temporary, profound. His last breaths carried the accumulated weight of an extraordinary life. Theological conviction, imperial ambition, personal tragedy. In those final moments, Philip II was no longer just a king. but simply a man, wrestling with pain, reflecting on a complex journey, preparing for an unknown transition. When death finally arrived, it came not as a dramatic event, but as a quiet surrender. The man who had once controlled an empire larger than any in human history was now just another soul facing the ultimate unknown, humble, mortal, fundamentally